it's Susie from HeyGrillHey.com, and today we are trimming a brisket. I'm going to show you how to trim a beautiful Packer brisket like this for your next backyard barbecue cook. Let's do it. Today I am working with a beautiful 17.5-pound whole Packer brisket. That means the flat and the point, this big muscle up here, are all connected, and it is a behemoth. And we need to trim it down before we smoke it. Now, if you are an anti-trimming brisket person, stop the video, move on to another one. I like to trim my briskets, and I'm gonna show you how I do it. One thing I always have on hand for trimming briskets and a bunch of other things in the backyard are these thin nitrile gloves. They're a super easy way to keep your fingers clean while you're doing a lot of this trimming work. I also have my favorite knife. This is a boning and fillet knife. Mine is from Shun. It's a Japanese style knife, but I did trim briskets for years just using my chef's knife. I will say this cut my brisket trimming time down by like half when I switched though. It's just the really fine point on the blade that allows you to get into those tight spaces. First, we gotta get this beauty out of the bag. You ready for a stupid trick? Here's a little your first hack of the day. Cut down the middle, open up the ends, and then kind of tuck these sides back in before you lift your brisket out, because there are juices in the packaging. If you do it this way, your juices won't run out because these little rolled sides will kind of create like a boat situation. And then just keep rolling. I didn't get a garbage can. Thank you. Magical garbage hand. Briskets out of the package. I always start with the fat side down on my cutting board and start by trimming this piece on the back. You don't need to do a lot here, but I do like to take off these bigger pieces of fat and any leftover silver skin. So I know several pitmasters that don't trim the underside of their brisket right here really at all. They say it's a waste of time. I totally get it. If that's you, that's totally fine. I've heard your story before. I like to. I think it helps me get a better bark more consistently across the bottom of this piece of meat if I take these pieces of fat off. So that's why I do it. I'm happy with that. Again, not looking for perfection here, just those bigger chunks of fat need to come off. Now we're gonna move on to this giant chunk of fat right here. It's kind of a crescent moon shaped and really thick and really fatty. This will not break down on the smoker and you don't wanna bite into it, so this whole thing can go. Okay, before you get too deep into this, I want to have a word about your trimmings, because this is a question that comes up all the time. What do you do with your brisket trimmings? Now, if I'm trimming light like this and just taking fat, I will save the fat and I will cook it down in a stock pot for 45 minutes to an hour, low heat, and then strain it. And that is like beautiful liquid beef tallow that you can use in potatoes, cooking anything in a cast iron skillet. It will be better by using rendered brisket tallow. If you are trimming even more of the meat part, you can save that also. It makes a beautiful burger grind. So you don't need to discard all that money that you spent. You can utilize every piece of this brisket. Every brisket's a little bit different, especially when you get up to the point. So sometimes I will take, come here. Sometimes there's a big piece of fat hanging over the point of the brisket right here before I even get to trimming, and I'll take that off on the flip side, but since it looks like most of the fat this time is on the top, I'm gonna wait until I flip it over to really tackle the fat cap on the point. But before I flip it over, here's my last step for this side of the brisket, is I like to trim my edges. It gives me a cleaner line if I do it while it's upside down and the fat cap is down. So I just run my knife along each side of the brisket, taking off little less than 1/4 of an inch, so I get nice, clean, uniform edges all the way around. right, one more thing before I flip this over is I want to talk about the cross section of this brisket. Once you trim these edges off, you get a really nice view of what's going on inside of your brisket. So you can see the flat right now. You can see where the flat starts and where it ends. And this fat seam runs perfectly in between the flat and the point. And that's really important. I'm gonna address it later in this video. We're at a good stopping point for now, but this gives you a good view of what you're looking at here. All right, flip. Now I would say this top part is where most of the controversy comes in the brisket world, as to how much fat do you trim off. And I'm gonna tell you that one is really up to you. I like to take the top of my brisket fat cap down to about 1/4 inch. I feel like if there's too much fat on top, it actually really inhibits the smoke from getting into the meat itself. You're just gonna have really smoky fat, which doesn't take on as much smoke, and you're probably not gonna eat all of it anyway. You're gonna end up cutting some of it away and you're losing all of that seasoning and the bark and the smoke. So if I trim it down to 1/4 inch, it'll render enough and we'll have plenty that we're willing to eat the fat that's on there. It'll keep the brisket moist and we get all the smoky flavor. So that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna take the top of my brisket down to about 1/4 inch thickness all the way across, and that's where trimming the sides in the step before comes in really handy, is I have a very clear idea of how thick the brisket fat cap is at any given point on the top of my brisket. All right, so I'm just gonna start at the top and work my way down this fat cap. And for me, I don't mind taking a couple passes. I'd rather take off too little to start and do another pass than take off too much. If you do take off too much, you'll just start to see the meat kind of peek through your fat right here, and that's totally fine. Just pull it back, start over. I promise it's not the end of the world. See that? Come here. I just did it because I was looking at the camera and not my brisket. See that? It's okay. I'm just gonna do this, cut it right there, and then start over because I still want that fat on top to insulate the brisket. And it's not even a big deal. Again, this is a backyard brisket trim. This is not a competition brisket trim. This is not, you're not gonna go for 1,000,000 stars and win 1,000,000 medals. This is how I trim a brisket when I'm cooking in my backyard and I want my brisket trimmed and I don't want to spend 4 hours trimming my brisket, okay? I move pretty quick. I don't make perfect cuts, but my brisket turns out awesome. And at the end of the day, that's all I'm going for. I'm not entering my trimmed brisket in a beauty contest. Oh, see, look at all this great fat. People get fatty briskets and they're kind of disappointed because like, oh, I paid for all this fat, but like this is value. Like you cook this down and you'll use this instead of butter, instead of olive oil, and you will be so happy. Big pieces of beautiful white fat up here on the point. And just work my way again, shooting for that 1/4 inch. You'll notice that the fat does start to get thinner across the top of your brisket. It's really thick typically on this side, and then the side where you have this nice little flap, it gets thinner. And I'm going to address the flap in a second, but just as we're trimming the top of the brisket, keep that in mind. You're not going to need to take as much off right here as you are over here. All right, and I'm happy with where the top is here. Everything is pretty even. Our brisket's gonna be nice and aerodynamic in the smoker, which means the smoke is gonna roll all the way around except for right here. And this is this flappy little piece of the point. And there are two different schools in the brisket trimming world on what to do with this. Some people trim the whole thing off, just a straight whooshoo, so the brisket is nice and smooth all the way across the top. You can save this for burger trimmings, or you can season it and put it on the smoker and have a little, pre-brisket treat for yourself. Or if you're gonna be separating the point and the flat completely, which is very common in the competition barbecue world, you'll generally want to leave this. Either way, we need to address this ginormous chunk of fat that's running in between the point and the flat. So we're gonna take that off right now. So I trimmed the fat away so you could just see this flap a little bit better. And you can see it's pretty thin. It's definitely not gonna cook at the same temperature as the rest of the brisket. So today, for me, it's coming off. Just run your knife along that flap so that it stays kind of in line with the top of your brisket everywhere else, just like that. That's looking lovely. Now, nobody's gonna eat this piece of fat either. So kind of like the crescent moon hard piece of fat we took off on the bottom, we're gonna wanna use our knife and get in there and remove a little bit of this fat as we go. We did it. That's it. If you are gonna be trimming a brisket for my Texas style brisket recipe, which I have a video for, you can totally check out, just Google Texas style brisket, Hey Grill Hey, it'll pull right up. This is where I stop for that particular recipe. And I think this is perfect for the backyard barbecue cook. I'm not too worried about the fat cap rendering down. I know we're gonna have beautiful bark that forms, and I feel good about the coverage and the evenness of my brisket. I think it's gonna cook really well on the smoker. If you wanna take it one step further, and again, this is not something I do when I'm cooking a low and slow brisket. This would be more for a hot and fat brisket application.
Say it again, you said hot and fat?
Hot and fat.
That's me.
Hey, Todd's hot and fat. Okay, for a hot and fast brisket application, which is a brisket that cooks at 275 or higher, I actually recommend taking out more of the fat seam in between the flat and the point. And the reason why is because it's not gonna have as much time to really slowly render down. It's not gonna cook down as much as it would in a low and slow smoking application. And I'm gonna do this brisket hot and fast. So I'm gonna take my knife, my job is not done, and I'm gonna separate the flat from the point a little bit here, not all the way, but I am gonna work my knife in between and remove a lot of this river of fat that runs in between the two pieces of meat. Ready? Do you wanna come watch? Okay, start up here where you can see that the flat is connecting to the point. And you're gonna lift the flat away while following the guides that the meat has given you from the side. I just use the tip of my knife and kind of flick and pull these pieces apart, and you can see the fat on the top and the bottom. So while I've got here, I'm not gonna separate it all the way down, I don't think today. Although if you just wanna make the point and the flat separately, you totally can. You can separate the two. We're gonna start up here at the top. I'm gonna use my knife to remove this fat. Now, if you wanted to keep your knife going all the way down that fat seam, you can actually separate the point from the flat completely. And I've done this several times. I will actually cure the flat for something like pastrami or just smoke it whole if I want some really beautifully uniform sliced brisket. And then you can turn the point up here entirely into burnt ends. I also have a recipe and instructions for separating the two on a separate video. But today, we're keeping them mostly together. So I'm not taking my knife all the way through and pulling them apart. As you can see, they're still connected. I'm just removing a bulk of this fat seam that runs in between. Now, some critics of brisket trimming say that if you take away this fat, you're gonna lose all of the moisture inside of the brisket. But that's not necessarily true. If you can see this brisket, it's USDA prime brisket, and it has some beautiful marbling. And the marbling is the fat striations that run in between the individual strands of meat. That's what's providing a majority of your moisture, is that intramuscular fat. This exterior fat really doesn't melt through those muscle strands. It essentially melts off and around the outside, and this fat in between doesn't have anywhere to go, so it just melts off and stays. And then when you see people slice the brisket and all the juices run right out that seam in the middle, that's this fat right here. It's running onto your cutting board. You're generally not eating it anyway, so it's not keeping the meat itself moist, but it is kind of basting the outside and can act as an insulator, which is why we like that fat cap. When you flip the brisket over, you can really see how big of a difference it makes taking that fat piece out in the middle. I mean, this brisket point used to sit up here. Now it's sitting much flatter, which means we have a much more even surface area for cooking. It doesn't make a huge difference if you're running 225 low temps the whole time. Since I will be cooking this brisket hot and fast, this aerodynamic shape gives me a lot more potential for even cooking and a juicier brisket. And that's how we're gonna end this video today, because this is how to trim a brisket. Now, how to smoke a brisket is up to you, and I have several videos to help get you there the right way and have a delicious brisket to feed your family, because at Hey Grill Hey, that's what it's all about. I wanna help you make better barbecues so you can feed the people you love and become a backyard barbecue hero. And when you do, snap a photo, post it online, use the hashtag Hey Grill Hey. That way I can see it and cheer you on your journey to becoming that backyard barbecue hero. See you next time. My name is Brisket. Susie did a terrible job today.
That's not true.